In fact, I'm going to introduce David Kraft and Dusty Tacha and let them take it away.
Okay. Thank you, Howard, and thanks for the meal, and make sure and thank that group that put it on. So it was a little chilly in here, but chilly on a chilly cold seat makes you feel pretty good, doesn't it? So anyway, yes, thank you, Howard, Cheney Lake Watershed, for giving us a chance to talk about some what I would say are pretty important issues that over my career, and I'll kind of outlay that, or maybe lay that out for you, what it's looked like, and then I'll let Dusty introduce himself as well. I used to work for the Natural Resources Conservation Service, just retired a year ago at the end of December. Prior to that, I was an ecological site specialist, writing ecological site descriptions from the Gulf Coast, Louisiana, Texas, over into New Mexico, up through the Dakotas and Montana. Prior to that, I was a state rangeland specialist for about a dozen years, and then prior to that, I was a range specialist in the eastern part of the state. So since then, I started working for the Kansas Grazing Lands Coalition, which is a statewide non-government organization that focuses on a lot of different things, but Dusty's dad and myself and 3 or 4 other individuals have kind of focused on different things like prescribed fire, grazing systems, that type of work. So Dusty, I'll let you introduce yourself. Oh, by the way, I'm from somebody asked me where I was from. I live about 150 miles to the east of here. So a little bit wetter than what you are right here. We're still dry, but we do have water in the ponds and water in our streams at this moment.
Hi there, I'm Dusty Tacha. Like David said, I do actively work for Natural Resources Conservation Service as a range specialist out of the Hutchinson area office. So I live, personally, I live here in Reno County. I live about 3 miles north of Prairie. But as an area office staff member, I roam. So we cover, if you were to draw a line from about Marion, straight west, clear out to Johnson City, Stanton County, to the Colorado line, and from there south to the Oklahoma line. That's what we cover. So it's a pretty wide gradient of issues, precip, land use, land management. So, but there's a few things that all of it has in common, and everybody deals with some sort of invasive plant. One of the invasive plants we're going to talk about today, old World Bluestem. There's not one county in this state that doesn't deal with that at this point. So. I'm originally from Oakley in northwest Kansas, so I don't know, maybe from that perspective there and David's eastern perspective, we merged the two together. Maybe we'll kind of hit you in the middle here, I don't know. But I've worked for NRCS for about 15 years now. Doesn't seem like it's been that long, but and deal a lot with the issues that we're going to talk about here today. Most of the stuff I deal with is on grazed range, and we're going to talk quite a little bit about CRP here today. A lot of our issues in this county are on CRP, and one of the things that I keep in mind is a lot of the CRP expires out of the program and either doesn't get accepted back in, or somebody just doesn't want to deal with CRP contract again, and we roll that stuff into grazed range. Then now you have cattle rotating through expired CRP with the invasive problems on expired CRP in conjunction with adjacent native range, and I have these deep concerns that we're going to drag a lot of the problems out of the CRP into the native range with the cattle. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind as we talk through today. So I'll let David kick it off here.
So I'm going to, I kind of entitled this Grazingland Concerns, and I'm going to talk a little bit about a few things that don't have anything to do with Sericea and Old World Bluestem. And I'm going to tell you right now that I'm a pretty positive person. Most of the time I'm really positive. And I hope that at the end of this day you still have that impression of me, although one of the things I was telling Dusty when we were finishing up our chili was that one of the things that I do feel more freedom in doing now that I don't work for the government is giving you my personal reflections on things. Some of the challenges that I personally go through on my own property, I have Old World Bluestem on one edge of it, and I also have Sericea Lespedeza. And so I'll give you some of my personal feelings on that and the challenges that you have. And I hope by the end of the day that you will hate some of these plants as bad as I do. And even if you think it's not the right time of the year to do something about it, that you'll get out of your side-by-side and dig that plant out with your pocket knife if you need to. That's how bad I hate some of these things that we're going to talk about. But I think you have to kind of get that internal, I don't know what it is, to really know what you're battling here, because in my career, which was over 35 years, we talked about doing a lot of control measures. And I will say that where I stand here today, things are a whole lot worse today than where we thought we were then. So we have a challenge ahead of us. So some of these Grazingland Concerns, again, since I don't work for the government anymore, I can put a few things in my own terms. Otherwise, I would have probably typically used a definition that came maybe right out of a manual or a directive that we have. But I look at Grazingland Concerns as this statement up above. When soil, water, air, plants, and animals are altered from historical reference conditions. Anybody, and I want to make sure that you understand that if you have a question or a comment, feel free to chime right in. Dusty and I do not care about if you ask that question now or at the end of when we get done talking. We don't want you to forget, and the likelihood that we might forget what question you asked, we could do that as well. So feel free to chime in at any point in time. What is a historic reference condition? Pre-European influence. Buffalo, certainly bison. There was probably a lot of ruminants that traveled across this landscape, especially through this part of the country, pretty freely. Certainly they were unimpeded by the things that impede the way that we do business today. Whether that be fire, whether that be grazing, the movement of those herds, totally different than what we have today. And as romantic as I like to think about things, and I used to really defend the state of Kansas in comparison to a lot of other states around us, saying that we had reference conditions still existing here within our boundaries or our borders. The longer that I digest that statement, I would say that that's probably untrue. In fact, several years ago, I heard somebody make this statement that there's probably not 1 acre left in the continental United States that doesn't have some kind of an invasive or unnative species on it. And so we've changed in about a 300 or 400 year period of time. We have drastically changed the landscape. A lot of that is our doing. Well, I'm going to say it's all our doing. But with that said, how do we deal with the things that we have presently today? So this reference condition that we talk about, though, is something that we can reflect back to. And a lot of that was done by individuals that traveled through this country. I have a crazy son that is the highest educated individual in my family that chooses to do weird things. He got out of grad school and he went to New Zealand and he hiked a trail, a 2,000-mile trail from the top of the North Island to the bottom of the South Island, and he grew into really loving what they call through hiking. So from that trip, he decided that that was something that he wanted to do periodically through his life, but his big bucket list thing was to re-hike the Lewis and Clark Trail. So last March, I dumped him off on the east side of the Mississippi in Missouri, and he built an aluminum cart, and he started dragging about 200 pounds of gear behind him, and I picked him up in Fort Peck, Montana in November. Now, a 2-month period of that time, he went to California and guided on a river out there for a little extra cash. But he tracks how things have changed through time. He's an ecologist, a biologist by training, and so at different points in time, wherever Lewis and Clark stopped to record what they saw, he records what he sees today. And it was really interesting. If any of you have ever been to Atchison, Kansas, and know what that looks like today, he was doing an interview for a nationwide blog, and he talked about what Clark had seen on this overlook over the river, the Missouri River, in 1804. And he talked about the sunset and the bison and the pronghorn. John at that point in time was clear up north and west of Pierre, South Dakota, had yet to see a pronghorn, had yet to see a bison. and the vegetation differences from 1804 to where we are in 2022 or 21 at that point in time are vastly different. So that reference condition that we often talk about are recorded and spoken of because individuals who traveled through this country back then. So as we talk about some of these things, keep in mind a lot of things have changed drastically. This plant community change, and with that I should say that we have some results or we have some collateral damage that comes along with these changes. Soil erosion, we definitely know that. Just when we see the impact of what goes down the river or downstreams and ends up in places like New Orleans, we know that we've lost a lot of soil off the land, whether that be by wind or water. Plant community change away from that historical expectation. So the number and the kinds of plants, we have a lot more introduced, a lot more invasive species. When we change those things within that plant community, things start to happen below the surface as well. And so we have other expectations that come with that. Forage production, typically when we start to see this plant community change, our forage production changes as well, most of the time to the negative side. And then the last thing, and the list that keeps growing, it seems like, best intentions a lot of times with some of these plants that we're going to talk about today, at one point in time they didn't think they were a problem. But now they are. And so how do we really curb that? And as a state specialist, I will tell you that probably over the dozen years that I was in that position, the number of these types of species that people wanted to plant, I would see at least 3 or 4 new ones every year. Wanted to try something new, wanted to try something different that was going to make their bottom line better. And sometimes at that moment, it's pretty hard to see what 30 or 40 or 50 years from now it's going to look like. Okay, so soil, and I'll give you some examples here. And then I'm going to get Dusty over here in a few minutes, and we're going to kind of tackle these individually as we look at some of the concerns that I can tell you I feel personally. So soil-related concern. This is a wintertime feeding area. Is this something that is natural? Absolutely not. Is it something that is caused by us? Absolutely so. And so choosing the right places for feeding areas, but also understanding that sometimes when we think we're doing things for the right reason, we may actually be causing problems. So that's a soil-related concern. A lot of that plant community has been completely taken off of that particular site, and now we have bare soil. And we can tell that water is a problem there, even though we know we're losing soil. But when you start to see water movement across to where it's trying to slow itself down, these are little litter dams, we know that that's an issue. Fence lines. What causes this? Cow paths. What causes cattle trailing to occur? Fences. Yeah, that's true. That's true. What else? Water. A lot of times I think one of the interesting things that there really wasn't a lot talked about when I was going through school, but if I had the chance to go back to school again, I guess I could, although I'd look a little bit odd to be an incoming freshman at 58 years old, but animal behavior. A lot of times we don't really understand animal behavior. A lot of times what causes fence line trailing to occur is cattle or livestock that are unfamiliar with a pasture. Maybe they're unfamiliar with the plant community. And so there's a lot of inbred stress into those animals, and what they do typically then is walk fences. And once that trailing gets started, repeated patterns happen, water starts to travel down that as well. The interesting, and Doug Spencer, another range specialist in Kansas, once did the calculations on that. If you've got a cattle trail, 100 foot long, 12 inches wide, 1 inch deep, ton of soil gone. So think about that. If you've got trails on your place, 12 inches wide, 1 inch deep, and 100 feet long, you've lost a ton of soil off of that particular piece of property. Here's an old recovered area, which I think is pretty neat. Sometimes when we do the right things, and this was a rotational grazing system that they had pulled the fences out, posts stayed in there, but through time, we can see some healing take place. And so again, understanding locations of fencing makes a lot of difference, and it doesn't necessarily look like a bad place to locate a fence. It might have been a property boundary at one point in time, but as they changed their management style, some of these issues started to heal up. So I think that's pretty interesting. All right, water resource concerns. I titled this complicated, but many times preventable. This was a photo that I took probably back in 2004, 2005. Mineral feeder located right at the upper edge, drainage into a pond. Any of you have anything that looks like that? It's okay to admit it. We've all put mineral right next to a pond because that's what it says on the bag. It has for years, locate near water. It's often thought that cattle have to have that salt and that mineral located right next to the water. This is certainly an issue, not only from a soil perspective, where we're starting to see quite a few salts deposited along the edge, certainly a denuded area where water flowing across that. What we probably don't realize maybe so much, because it happens and we can't see it, we've just cut the life of this pond tremendously as it silts in and fills up with that material that is now loosened up and made available to be eroded into the pond. Again, going back to a little bit of that animal behavior side, this is a ranch in the Flint Hills, a fence line along a road. And so again, any kind of impedance from what was natural in a historical perspective can cause problems. So these are cattle that most likely came out of the southeast, pretty unfamiliar with our native pastures. We've got a crossing here. We certainly have a water quality issue. We've got some stream bank degradation for certain happening there. And so this again is a stress-related thing with these cattle. There's been some interesting work done on how you can remove some of that stress. And certainly I think the more we know about that, the better that we can probably give our pastures a chance to adapt to that, or at least the cattle to adapt to our pastures. Here's one that's interesting. Back when I was a state range specialist, there was a battle, and KLA fought this pretty hard, where there was a movement to try to fence out riparian areas, to exclude them from any kind of grazing pressure. And it was a pretty good battle. And ultimately, the side of the rancher won that battle to where they still had access to streams. But what causes this problem to occur? And you can see this is an old roadside box type bridge, but what causes this to occur? I mean, is it bad to graze and use streams as that primary source of water? No right or wrong answers here. We're in church. Very true. In fact, I think, Cammie, there was an interesting journal article back in, it was in the 1800s, where an individual that had a bunch of horses that he was trying to sell to the fort in Fort Riley. And he brought them across from Topeka towards Manhattan, towards that Junction City area where the fort was, to sell to the cavalry. And as he got there, there wasn't enough vegetation even for those horses to sustain themselves, because there was some bargaining going on between the individual trying to sell the horses to the cavalry and the cavalry bargaining with the individual. And in the meantime, he had to move those horses all the way back towards Topeka to be able to find enough vegetation for those horses, because the bison had really worked that area over pretty hard. And the source of water would have certainly been the Kansas River and other streams that would have been through there. So definitely, bison used those areas, those types of water developments, or those types of water sources. So what causes this?
Used it too long.
There you go. Time, repeated, and the process that comes with that. Can we graze something like this and use that as our primary water source? Absolutely. If we provide rest, it will recover. But this is the repeated process of using it the same way over and over again. And because of that, you get negative results. Okay, so plant concerns. Again, we're targeting looking back towards what was referenced. You know, this is one of those types of photos that I would have said is really close to anything that might be referenced in the central part of the United States. This is a shot looking off of what we call Teeterville Hill. If you come down First Street in Newton and head east, you can go right by my house. But this is in the Flint Hills. This is just to the east of Cassidy, probably about 12 miles. And as you look across that landscape, it's pretty hard not to imagine what it might have looked like 100 years ago or 200 years ago. But again, the invasive species have found these locations as well. But anyway, we are making references back to what we think these communities look like. To do that, I think we need to step back, and so I want you to I guess, bear with me as I go through a few of these slides, why this is really important. And Dusty, chime in anytime you want to add something to this. But understanding our plant communities and how native plant communities function is really important. One thing that we often look at, and even in our country, and I think the risk of dealing with some of the plants that we're talking about today, Sericea Lespedeza and Old World Bluestem, when we have to fight those battles, ultimately, a lot of these plants that we see as desirable and that really have, through time, made these areas very viable, but also very resilient, when we start to take some of these plants out, we have problems. The potential for problems goes up. But to understand this plant community, about a third of the total production of that plant is above ground. 2/3 of it is below in the soil. And we don't see that. And so we kind of miss part of that. The other important thing is that about 30 to 35% of those root systems are replaced every year. Why do we have these dark soils in these rangelands or prairie ecosystems? It's because of the turnover, that carbon, that breakdown of that plant material, those root systems that have been really vital to making it an extremely healthy environment. When we look at that, maybe from a photographic point of view, this is a photo that I took in Chautauqua County. And as you look, it's kind of hard because of the size of it, but we've got all kinds of different plants. Some that have these types of root systems, and then we've got grasses that have very fibrous root systems, but they may go down for 8 or 10 feet or even deeper, depending upon how deep that soil is. Very diverse plant communities. What does grazing do to them? And this is an old illustration, I don't know, Dusty, back in the 30s and 40s. This might have been at Fort Hays, where this photo was actually taken. But it's an illustration of what grazing and removing top growth does to the root system itself below ground. Now, can we graze something fairly severely and let that plant recover and it maintains a root system? Yes, we can. It is keeping it down here that really starts to diminish the root volume. So we can take it from here and we can take it down to here, and there's very little damage done to that plant. But if we hold it down here or even below, we really start to see problems. This kind of illustrates that. So as a percent of leaf volume removed, we start to see then a decrease in that root growth. And so the longer that we keep that plant down here in this really overutilized state, we really start to see root damage. What happens when these roots are pruned to that point in time? What happens to the rest of the plant community? What happens to the opportunity? There you go, invasives. Some of the things we're going to talk about today. Now, I will say that these two individuals that we are primarily talking about today they're overachievers. But they look for opportunities. And any time that we give them the opportunity, we weaken what is in that plant community and the root system below and the canopy that protects the surfaces above, we give them an opportunity to start. And once they are there, the battle begins. And at this point in time, I will tell you, we haven't finished the battle at all. I'm not even sure in some ways we've started. So, from a grazing concern, I just traveled through this country a couple of weeks ago. This is in Sonora, Texas. Anybody ever been to Sonora, Texas? I drove into it at night, but I got to see it the next morning. It's an area that doesn't get a lot of rainfall, not a lot of precipitation there. Why do you suppose they put rocks on one side of the fence and not on the other? Yeah. there's a lot of issues there, but this certainly has had a long duration of overutilization of the forage that is typically or native grass growing there. And you see parts of Texas. My son is working down in the Big Bend National Park area this year, and one of the guides was there, and I wasn't quick enough to respond to him. But anyway, he said, "Where are you from?" And I said, "The great state of Kansas." He goes, "What's great about it?" And I wasn't thinking quick enough. I would have said, "There's not an acre in Texas I'd trade for an acre in Kansas anywhere." But this part of the country has seen a huge and long history of overgrazing. And so there's a lot of areas that are certainly unreflective of what it would have looked like 150 years ago. So here's another issue that sometimes comes along with things we just say, well, it just naturally happens. These are Osage orange or hedge trees in a kind of an intermittent stream area. But as we let these trees start to grow, cattle congregate, spend a lot of time underneath there, we start to see a lot of nutrients deposited there. We have an overgrazed area, if you will, to go along with that. And pretty soon, we can't even get fire to alter this plant community at all. And so things like this that kind of creep in over time. I mean, most of the time we don't see a small cedar tree until it's 2 or 3 feet tall, realizing it's probably been there at least a year or two before we actually saw it. So sometimes, and then they get, all of a sudden they're 10 foot tall. And how did they get there? They change so quickly. Sometimes good intentions have bad outcomes. This is right in the dead set center of Greenwood County, and this was a hedgerow planted right out here in the middle of the Flint Hills. I'm not exactly sure why, although I'm guessing that part of this at some point in time had been farmed. They planted a hedgerow, and downstream now and away from that, we've got a seed source that's spreading rapidly. And so good intentions sometimes, again, knowing what the characteristics of those plants are pretty vital to understanding what kind of concerns we might have in the future. How many of you have seen this? I don't even know where I took this picture, but I'll tell you that from my place to here, I could have taken this same picture many times. And you know, the problem with a lot of that is, and I hope I don't step on too many toes here, but a lot of times the bigger they get, the more desirable it is to clear out a little bit of an area, put a house right in the middle of it because of its protective values. But the eastern red cedar, I don't know where I would say it was at its worst, but it's moving in a lot of different directions. I used to think that, you know, the worst example of eastern red cedar expansion was as you came down off 177 into Manhattan, and the volume of eastern red cedar on some of those slopes with $500,000 houses in it was probably the worst. But there's so many places in this corridor where eastern red cedar is tremendously present, and those acres are, Oklahoma. This would have been 20 years ago. They were saying that they were losing 760 some acres. I think it was a day to eastern red cedar invasion into that, which is, that number doesn't even sound feasible or correct. But when you see how sometimes you don't see these little plants like this until they get up to maybe like that. Now, of course, the harder you graze it, the easier they are to see. But when they get to this size and larger, then fire, and with the lack of fuel, fire doesn't or may not do much to them other than burn the bottom third of them. So these are issues, again, plant-related issues. Now here's one that we're going to talk about. Man, it sure is pretty green. I told somebody that there's not much better green than Memorial Day in the Flint Hills. That's about as pretty as green gets to me. Well, this is probably about that time of the year, but this is not the color of green that I think we should be really proud of. But we see a lot of plant communities that have Sericea Lespedeza that are infested or invaded that bad or worse. So let's start talking about some of this, and I'll give you a few pieces of information, and Dusty, don't hesitate to jump in here. But native to Asia and Eastern Australia, we used to say that 1927 to 1930 was when it was introduced to into the United States, but I found some information. Google is a powerful thing, you know. 1896 is when it was first introduced into North Carolina. And so it's been in the eastern United States for a long time. The primary reason for bringing it over here, it was a legume. It's thought to be a kind of a poor man's alfalfa, if you will. Didn't require a lot of fertilization. It was very hardy. It was very strong, very prolific seeder. Boy, it just checks all the boxes for something that's easy to manage. And for one reason or another, in the southeast, you know, they tolerate it. They do some pretty interesting things with it. But again, some of the issues that we have, and maybe our acceptance is a little bit different. I have a really good friend that lives in South Carolina, and this was probably, I don't know, 25 years ago. We were working on a computer model in Fort Worth, and we were both there, and I was explaining to him the problem with Sericea Lespedeza. He said, "What's the problem with it?" I said, "Well, we can't control it." And he goes, "Oh, we control it." I said, "Well, let me know. I mean, quit keeping the secret." And he goes, I said, "What do you do?" And he goes, "We spray it with 2,4-D. And I said, "And that controls it?" And he goes, "Well, it reduces it down to about 25% of the stand." I said, "We have a difference in opinion about what control is. We want to get rid of it. You want to keep part of it." And so understand there are some different opinions on the value of it. Now, we do, maybe our goals are just a little different here. I like to think that from a native plant community perspective, we kind of still guide the ship in that regard in this part of the country. In that part of the country where history is a lot different and a lot older, and how use and that European influence across has changed things, they're not dealing with a lot of native plant communities anymore, except for in some of the forested areas. One of its issues, though, because we would think that, hey, this is something that it looks very green and lush, and in fact, they make hay out of it. There is some differences in some of the species and how it's adapted, and subspecies have changed from east to west. But it's got this high tannin level that kind of interferes with protein absorption. And so a lot of our livestock, especially cattle, can't eat a lot of it. It just really binds up the digestive process. So it has issues. Now, I will tell you in some of my personal reflections here in a little bit that if you think they won't eat it, they will. And if you can't figure out why it got into some place that you have now, very likely it was spread by animals. If not deer, then certainly by birds, but it's moving. I mean, the seed is you get enough flood water, you can move that seed, but that seed's going to stay pretty close to where it fell unless it is moved by that animal. So, cattle may graze plants. I would say that typically, if it's grazed while that plant is young. So a lot of times after fire, you'll see cows graze that, you'll see yearlings graze it. Sometimes it's before that plant matures too much, the tannin level is too high, and it could be also an unfamiliarity with that plant. So you go through the buffet line at sirloin stockade and you think that looks pretty good. You eat a little bit of it and you go, hey, wasn't so good after all. That can happen with animals as well. But if they keep it young, they're more likely to come back and use it again. Some domesticated ruminants, goats, sheep, have shown some promising results from grazing it. Actually can perform somewhat well on it. And I'll talk to you a little bit about that in a moment, that maybe in a combination with other ways to attack this plant, maybe that's part of the answer. So we'll dive into that in a little bit. Very drought tolerant. As Dusty said, Old World Bluestem is found in every county in the state. I'm pretty sure that when the Kansas State Department of Ag surveyed all those counties, there was very few counties in the state of Kansas that didn't have didn't have Sericea Lespedeza in them as well. Whether that be by CRP or by movement of forage products, one way or the other, we've got Sericea Lespedeza in a big chunk of the state. It used to be thought that it wouldn't grow west of a line of that 25-inch rainfall area. That didn't last long in the theory when you started to see it in CRP west of Garden City. So it's out there. Lives a long time. Some of these plants, when you see a plant that's that big, it's been alive for quite some time. The one thing that's kind of interesting about this plant, when it first germinates, that first year, it probably only gets about that big. It's a very spindly, looks almost like an annual Lespedeza that you mow in your yard. Very spindly. If we can get it then, we can be pretty successful. But realizing then it takes about 2 to 3 years for it to be able to produce seed. The other thing that I learned about this plant years ago, and you know, when you go on vacation, you shouldn't think about these things, but we were canoeing a river in Arkansas, and I was going down that lazy river, and you look off into the shadows or into the shade underneath trees where you're never going to get a chemical in there to treat that plant, and it's growing quite well. So it can grow in a range of environments, and that could be from open to shaded areas. So it's very difficult to get complete control. Historic treatments, they ranged, and a lot of times the first treatments were derived from the USDA manual and Dusty. Have you seen that manual where it talked about how to grow Sericea Lespedeza? I think it was written in the 50s, maybe 1956. These are the things you do to grow it. These are the things you don't do if you want to keep that stand healthy. So a lot of the first directives, or at least ideas on how to treat Sericea, came from what not to do, to have a healthy stand. Some of that was mowing late in the summer when it's trying to put on a seed and flower. And so some of those first prescriptions came from that kind of information. Light rates of chemical, that's what they use in the southeast to kind of keep it in check. In Kansas, Dr. Fick would tell you, and even Gary Kilgore, that because chemicals like Tordon were successful in treating a lot of different legumes, they thought it wouldn't be any problem. Tordon's not one of the better chemicals you'll get some control on Sericea Lespedeza, but it's not the real prize winner when it comes to the best type of control. But anyway, we were using heavier rates of chemical to try to do it. Annual burning, you can keep that old growth new, but what we've found in that time since is that the type of temperatures, a lot of times that we get with a head fire, where a lot of that heat is moving up and away from that plant, is just the right temperature to make that seed more viable. So what seed you have then germinates more easily. And so some of the issues, or some of the things that we thought we could control with fire, this is not one of them. Now it makes that plant more immature and probably then more grazeable if it's in that condition. Use of goats and sheep, and I think probably the earliest studies that I saw was probably in the early 90s with goats. And you got about 6, 7, 8 years, and I'm talking about at a minimum probably 6 to 10 goats per acre, repeatedly grazed year-round or through that growing season. Looked pretty promising. The day that they decided that study had done its course, pulled them off within a few years, just almost solid back. So it's almost a little bit like some other things in life that when you really make it mad, it fights back pretty hard. Sericea is certainly one of those. And Old World Bluestem's not far from that either. Okay, so what do we know? Well, I'm not sure. Probably 15 years ago, I was on a panel at a KLA field day in Woodson County, and I was the fourth on this panel to be able to talk, and it was all about Sericea. This particular ranch had a lot of it, had a history of treatment of the plant. And from about 1 through 3, it was all, well, I would say it was cautious optimism. And it got to me, and I really felt frustrated. I just come from a grazing school where we talked a lot about it and seen a lot of different examples. And I said, well, I don't know about anybody else, but I said, I'm treating the same areas that I've treated for the last 20 years, and it's getting worse. And so what we were doing, and maybe the things that we thought were right and the best, weren't really giving us the dividends that we hoped for. And I will tell you that battle, I think, is still there today. I'm not sure that, and we're losing ground when it comes to total acres in the state of Kansas that now have Sericea, the acres that have been sprayed and resprayed over and over and over again. So don't lose hope yet, but it's a battle. So what do we typically now see? Spring and fall treatment options with chemical. This is not just the end all right here, just chemical. But spring and early summer with triclopyr, or trade name maybe more common you might think of as Remedy. Fairly commonly used in the spring, typically in the month of June. Probably one of the reasons why it's used at that point in time is some other undesirable woody species you might capture within that same operation. So that's springtime. Now it depends on who you talk to. Some people will say that spring is the best. Others will say late summer or fall when it's blooming is a better time. That typically with metsulfuron or, now I lost the chemical. Escort is the other thing that's used. Now the difference you'll see in these two treatment types, this one is a quick kill. The Escort seems to take a little bit longer. It's like a 2 or 3 week process. It's almost like you're starving it to death. To be honest, I've gotten to the point where I don't care which time of the year it is. If I see it, I'm going to hit it with something. Just because I've grown to hate it that much. And I'm going to let Dusty talk a little bit more. I've got a picture of this here in just a moment. Prescribed for fire during the growing season. Now, Lyle and I was just talking about maybe it's not a good time this spring to actually do a fire prescribed burn, but a lot of times growing season burns may be safer, and the results, and certainly from a control or management perspective, might be better for this plant, especially keeping it from making seed. So, as an end all, combinations, I think, in the future going forward, and I don't think we have all the answers yet, but combinations of grazing, chemical, and prescribed fire are probably in the mix. And I will say, even at that point in time, I hope that we can keep it at a manageable level. What we do know about this seed is that 20, 30 years, if you've, Lespedeza seed in general, whether it's an annual or something that we've domesticated, I remember looking at a CRP field in Woodson County in the late 80s. And the first year planting was just nothing but annual Lespedeza in this cropland. And I said, when was the last time you planted Lespedeza in there? I said, 1950, somewhere in that ballpark. So this kind of seed can lay in that soil bank and that seed bank for years. So just because you might have several years of success, as soon as you let your guard up, you'll find more. So it's not a battle that you're ever going to completely get over. You're going to just be a part of. All right, so again, we have a problem. This is all Sericea Lespedeza, and here's some of the issue with chemical use. You also have these plants in there as well. That's a lead plant, a native legume, shrub, kind of a, I don't know if you'd call it a half shrub or it's a woody, depending on how frequently you burn, but that's a good legume. And a lot of times when we target the bad ones, we're going to sacrifice some of the good ones. And I think that's maybe the most frustrating piece of information from an ecologist point of view that we know is probably a reality. That diverse plant community that I've talked about being so special, I think that's one of the things that we're going to sacrifice by the control that we have to take. Okay, Dusty, I told you I was going to get to this slide. It's got a fire on it here in a minute. So again, my thoughts, treatments have been limited in success. Areas infested in Sericea Lespedeza will require retreatment and constant scouting, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. Successful treatments and management will probably include multiple types and approaches. Preventing the development of seed, I think, should be one of your goals. If nothing else, preventing seed production should be one of your goals. How you do that, whether that's by chemical or by a growing season fire or by grazing it down to the nubbins, and there are some studies out there where cattle have grazed it, they come back in with sheep in the latter part of the summer and they'll go through there and prune those plants. They've reduced seed production quite emphatically. Keeping those existing plants young, 2 years or old or less, and a lot of times the program related, and Dusty can speak more to this, but we've tried to, even from a contractual standpoint, if you're in a contract where you're treating Sericea Lespedeza, you can get multiple treatments for that, but we're going to stage them out over probably a 2-year period. Once in year 1, then probably in year 3. Because if we kill everything in year 1, and we have seed that comes up in year 2, yeah, we could probably kill it, but it's not going to make seed until year 3. So that plant has to be at least 2 years before it makes seed. So we can minimize maybe the number of treatments. So keeping them young, investigate opportunities in the midst of a challenge. Had one young rancher in Chautauqua County and Cali County that on some of their operation, they grazed cows and they were spraying Sericea, in a rotation of every 3rd year. And they knew what the costs were associated to that treatment. They invested in goats, and now they use that opportunity to put meat on goats and sheep and sell that product, and they figure that in the cost of what they have, that it's, instead of spending $30,000, they've generated an income of $60,000 in that same time window. And so there are opportunities out there. Not everybody is cut out to be a goat or sheep owner, and that comes along with its own challenges, but there are some opportunities, and I think sometimes we have to look for the lemonade in the midst of the lemons. And then embrace adaptive management strategies. And so, Dusty, cue you. Here's the summertime burn. Dusty, give us some of your reflections on summertime or growing season burns.
Okay, so for starters, I think everybody is, when you think of prescribed burning, controlled burning, we call it prescribed burning. It's worth a prescription, right? A plan, everything's laid out, equipment. That's a whole nother talk for a whole nother day. We'll probably be doing some of those here in about the next month or so. But prescribed burning, we normally think of that springtime, normally April in our state. And I think a lot of that, burning of grassland in April is a spread westward out of the Flint Hills for, burning for primarily for livestock production, right? We're getting rid of the standing dead, so everything's fresh growth, everything's high quality forage. Every bite is of the highest nutritional value that way. And I think with the changing landscape and a lot of the things that David's hit on, probably not 1 acre that's not affected. There's certainly not any acres unaffected drastically by European human influence, but even by invasive species. I think we probably need to change the mindset of prescribed burning as a tool, and not so much from the animal performance side of things, but from the land management side of things. And that's what although we have found that growing season burning does certainly have the animal performance benefits pretty similar to spring burning. So, if you're not going to lose anything by switching, then it's a win-win, right? So growing season burning, we're talking late July through the month of August, maybe into September. I'm a pyromaniac. I like fire. It's an excellent tool. When you look around this countryside and you look at the profound effects of removal of fire from the landscape, because this sort of thing was once a very common occurrence here, pre-European, right? Us folks of European descent, we have this innate fear of fire, right? And over the last 150 years or so, we've gotten pretty good at suppressing it. I mean, we've got really good at suppressing it. We've got too good at it. You can talk to people, from here on down the upper Cheney Lake. There's a number of pictures of some of the original places here, up and down the Nenaskaw River, and 1 or 2 cottonwoods, no other trees, and that was it. And now look at it. And woody encroachment is one of the primary profound changes on the landscape that has resulted from lack of fire. Growing season fire from spring fire. The purpose here, primarily, particularly from a woody plant perspective, is heat. We're after the heat. So if you burn in the spring, aside from maybe a day like yesterday when it was 82 or 83 degrees, which is a little scary, you know, you're looking at, you know, weather in the 50s, 60s, you know, humidity 40, 50, 60%, somewhere in there, and you run a fire through there, you know, yeah, you can roll one through, and they're a hot fire. They spread fast, hot, fast-moving head fire, and then it's over. A growing season fire, while sometimes it just looks like they're creeping along, they move slower. They fire residence time. The time that the fire is over any one part of the ground as it moves across is higher because it moves slower, so it holds the heat to the ground better. And just the overall heat in the atmosphere all around the fire in the air becomes hotter, because if you're burning on a day where it's 90 or 95 degrees, you know, you've got that working for you in addition to the BTUs coming off your fire. So in the case of like woody plants, we know that you have to raise the temperature of the plant tissue to 140, 150 degrees Fahrenheit to kill it, okay? And so if you're burning at 50, 60 degree ambient temperature weather in the spring, you've got to have, you know, fairly substantial heat from your fire to get to that point, and be concerned about if you can slow the fire down in that dormant dry fuel enough to hold the fire there over a plant long enough to get that margin of gain. In the summer, fire's moving slower. You already started off at 95 degrees. You only got to get to here. You don't have to close as much of the gap with the fire. They're an easier fire to control from a safety standpoint. The one thing I'll say from a safety standpoint, both for the crew on the ground, well, two things. From the crew on the ground and the surrounding community, they produce a lot of smoke because all the water content that's in the growing vegetation, you know, when that steams off, that produces smoke. So like, you know, pouring a bucket of water on a campfire, lots of smoke, right? And so that can present problems for roadways and that sort of thing, as well as the fire crew on the ground actually conducting the burn. And then the second thing I'll say is you have to be a little bit more cognizant when you're out there burning of heat, because, you know, you're working around a fire in 60 degree weather versus working around a fire in 95 degree weather. So those are kind of the split differences. That's the general concept. One side note on a USDA side of things, kind of away from, we'll try to keep this mostly technical, but I know a lot of folks in the room are thinking CRP. And we used to have rules, FSA had rules that were somewhat restrictive, particularly for a lot of the soil that we have in Reno County, having to do with how sandy it is and when you could and couldn't burn CRP. And that used to be fairly restrictive for the growing season burning. So obviously, if you burn late, you kind of try to get some regrowth before winter comes on, so we're not sitting all winter with bare ground, right? Particularly if it's sandy soil. And that was a primary concern, and I'm not saying that's not a warranted concern. But when you look around at the ground we're losing from lack of fire, we're losing it to trees and all this other invasive stuff, you kind of got to decide, okay, well, do I want a field full of trees that should be grassland, or am I willing to put up with the risk of maybe having a little sand sifting around over the winter? Now, I'll tell you, doing what I do day in and day out, that's a no-brainer decision for me. So FSA has changed their tone a little bit, and we no longer really deal with the restriction of growing season burning on CRP, regardless of how sandy your soil is. Now, I'm not saying, you know, don't use your head a little bit. You know, we're dry right now. If we remain dry, I think, you know, spring burning is probably going to be pretty well a no-go for most cases. I wouldn't be surprised if we remain dry. We're probably going to see a county burn ban here pretty soon. And if we remain dry through the growing season, and you know, that's just going to shorten up our subsoil moisture as the growing season progresses. If there's no subsoil moisture, then a growing season burn is probably also not a good idea. But in an average year, have at it, even if it's that below sandy type stuff. When it comes to Sericea, maybe David has some slides regarding some of the data on the growing season burning
No,
stuff.
I
Okay.
don't.
So the idea behind Sericea Lespedeza, so that stuff flowers in last week of August, first week of September. It kind of depends on the year. Around here, I've noticed it. Past couple of years, it's been flowering the first week or two in September. Which by the way, if you're going to spray it with Escort with metsulfuron, that's the time you do it when it flowers. Okay. So, and then of course, shortly after flowering, it produces seed, right? So if we go out and burn that plant in August, and it'll take it down, it'll be green, but green plants do burn. I mean, they're still loaded with structural carbohydrates, just like the dry plants. They just have some water in them too, right? They will burn, and down they go. And so now you've set that plant back big time, right before it was thinking about flowering and making seeds. So as David said, you're talking about a plant, a mature Sericea plant produced 700 seeds in a season, in 1 year. You've eliminated it from producing seed that year. So at least you've kind of stopped the bleeding on the seed situation. And a lot of the research done by Dr. Casey Olson out of K-State has also shown that you can greatly reduce the vigor of those adult plants with the growing season fire. So, as David was saying, neither one of these things are the catch-all, end-all. It's using all of it together methodically of chemical and fire. Okay, I have no expectation that we could, no matter how hard we hit it, we probably cannot spray Sericea off the landscape, nor could we burn it off the landscape. But maybe, just maybe, and I think the jury's still out, using the two of them together, we might have a chance. Okay. I'll tell you that the CRP around is pretty heavily plagued with Sericea. I would about have to suspect that it was probably a seed contaminant when that stuff was seeded. I first took the position out of the Hutch area office early in 2012, and there was some Sericea around. I mean, I knew where there was some. I'd see it. We'd find it from time to time. But it seems like over the last maybe 5 or 6 years, it just has like come out of nowhere. Of course, it didn't come out of nowhere. We know where it came from. It was these decades-old seeds sitting in the soil. That's where it came from, right? And for whatever reason, I mean, I'm sure there was some of those plants that were lingering down low that just weren't really robust yet. But I think a fair chunk of it was probably just sitting as seed in the soil, and for whatever reason, sometime in the last 6 or 7 years, things got good for it, and it took off. It germinated. Okay. And now we've have a substantial amount of it. I was out looking at last week and the week before at people who had signed up for the Environmental Quality Incentives Program for grazing land health. So we're talking, fences, water sources, prescribed grazing, take care of your brush, spray your Sericea, whatever kind of problem issues we find on grazing lands. The program pretty well can somewhat address those things, or at least help you address them, I should say. And a fair chunk of what rolls into that program in this county now, didn't used to be, but now is stuff that is expired out of CRP, or is no longer, it's not been accepted, or is not being reoffered, whatever. It's no longer in CRP, but it was formerly. And now people are putting in equip to get cost share assistance for perimeter fence, water, and go to grazing. And so we go look at every one of them. And I'll bet I probably looked at 20 or 22 of those applications over the last 2 weeks, and a healthy 2/3 of them had Sericea on them. And it wasn't just in any one area either in the county. It was all the way from what we'll call the Red Jaw over on the east side of the lake all the way to Turon. So
I'm going to ask you a question about that in a minute. Don't let me forget to come back to it.
okay. So yeah.
Can you expand on what cost share is available for either Sericea or Old World?
I've got a slide coming up on that.
Okay, we'll wait to hit
Dusty
that
could
then,
probably
and then I
answer
can
that.
add to when we get to that. Yeah, that's a good point. So it's a problem. I think this is a big part of our answer, but I'm here to tell you, when it comes to land management, there are no silver bullet answers for any of this. There's no silver bullet answer for getting rid of this stuff. This stuff was once somebody's silver bullet answer for something, as was Old World Bluestem. So there are no silver bullet answers. And so somebody says, well, you got to plant this, and you've never heard of it, be suspicious. Not saying don't educate yourself, but be suspicious. Somebody says, here's a grazing system that'll just, save the farm. Be suspicious. There's no such thing as an easy out when it comes to land management. I mean, it's nose of the grindstone, slow and steady wins the race, right? And so most of the problems that we deal with, well, if we benchmark everything in the pre-European range condition, right, we can say that all of the problems that we deal with were once created by us, not maybe us in the room, but certainly our ancestors. Now, I live over here by Prairie, and we just built a brand new home, and just about 300 foot south of our house is one of those really nice 1940s shelter belts, right, that my ancestors planted there. My mom was born and raised on that place. And yeah, my grandparents would have planted that tree row, and that thing just plagues me. If I had a D8 sitting out back, the thing would be gone. You won't find anybody that hates trees more than me. One thing that plagues our CRP a lot that I think this can kind of help out with, that maybe it's not a focal point of today. We can have a whole nother day talking about woody encroachment. But invasive deciduous trees in our area, Siberian elm trees, Chinese elm, piss elm, whatever you want to call them, it's the same tree, okay? Siberian elm is the more appropriate common name for that tree. And they're planted in every 1870s, 1880s established community around. There are several rows of them in most of these 1940 shelter belts, along with other hardcore invaders, eastern red cedar, Osage orange or hedge, honey locusts, black locusts. These are all big time problems. I'll say one thing for the cedar tree is fairly easy to control with fire. All this deciduous stuff, which the cedar is pretty much our only woody invasive that is a non-resprouter, okay? So once you kill the top end of the plant, you're done. Okay, all this other stuff, they're resprouting species. So just because you top kill a plant doesn't mean it's gone. It's probably going to sucker back out from the base, right? And that's what we're seeing a lot with the spring burn, which was the impetus for getting FSA to kind of loosen things up for us on CRP. Spring burning, we're simply not touching the problem. That's what this is. I think this is my picture, isn't it? Or is that yours?
No, it's not mine. August 13th, though.
Yeah, I think this picture was about a mile and a half southwest of Castleton. Okay, and that had been in CRP. You can see the trees out in there. We're just simply not tickling that stuff with spring fire. Once you get an elm tree up there like that, you're not going to kill it with a spring fire. But we have killed some with a summer fire. It gets hot. It's a nasty proposition to do, but it can be done. So be thinking about that. I mean, if you got Sericea, if you have Sericea on CRP or expired CRP, and particularly if you have trees too, I think the growing season burning is the best bet for both worlds. Now, here again, so brush encroachment is a whole nother day, maybe 2 or 3 days talk, I don't know. Same with prescribed burning. I mean, we do prescribed burn workshops and all that. I will tell you just from the logistics of prescribed fire, in the springtime, even when it's not bone dry like it is now, March and April in this part of the world, you're only going to get 8 days in a bad year, maybe 12 in a good year of burnable days. So say 10 days out of 60 that are burnable. So your window's pretty tight and you simply just can't get across enough ground to get it done. Because of it's that tight, you see people that are kind of bumping the mark on when they should and when they shouldn't be burning. And that causes public perception. Well, it causes real problems when it comes to prescribed fire. Out of control fires, fire department response, taxpayer expense and burden. And what it seriously does is cause a public perception problem of burning on the landscape. And that's something we just simply can't afford, because we know from an ecological standpoint that we simply cannot afford to not burn, okay? And I think most people in our part of the world realize that the rural agricultural voice is a minority in today's political landscape. Okay, so public perception is something to be reckoned with. Growing season burning, atmosphere You know, we think of thunderstorms and all that, but the reality is the weather pattern in the atmosphere is fairly stable last part of July all the way through August. I mean, yeah, I could pretty well put on the calendar, you know, 2 weeks out, you know, we're going to burn that day. There's a pretty high probability that we can make it happen on that day given whatever weather conditions are going to be that day. Whereas, you know, it's touch and go this time of the year. I can say, well, you know, day after tomorrow looks good, and I get up 6 o'clock that morning, the forecast is completely changed, and I got to call everybody I had coming to help me and say, deal's off today, it's no go. It's just that erratic. So a lot more burnable days, a lot stabler condition. Fires move slower, they are smokier, it's hotter out there to deal with, but by and large easier to control. We can put a ding on Sericea Lespedeza. We can damage a lot of these resprouting invasive tree species with it, and not ding the following year's cattle, livestock enterprise too awful much. Now, a lot of the stuff that was done in the Flint Hills on growing season burning against Sericea, as I recall, I think that they were doing back-to-back years of burnings. They were burning early enough in the last half of the growing season to get some regrowth, to have some fuel to roll over the next year so they could do it again the next year. And I think we've kind of come to the conclusion, wasn't the conclusion I wanted to come to, but it's the truth. I just don't know that we, with our precip here, and certainly west, I don't think we can pull that off. I don't think if you have a growing season burn this summer, you're not going to be burning next summer, spring or growing season. Because understand that no matter what you do, whether it's a spring fire or growing season fire, the fuel for that fire is the standing dead from the previous growing season, okay? So, you know, this thing, I mean, you see there's a whole bunch of green big bluestem and stuff in here, but it's all the dry fodder that was left over from the previous year down in there. That's the fuel. That's what we're banking on to carry that fire. And when it rolls through there, it's going to take all the green stuff with it. But when I say green stuff burns, it will. But on most days, it in and of itself won't burn alone. It's got to have some dry to burn with it. So. That's the general 2 cents on growing season burning. We could talk a lot more about it, but we have seen some benefit. Yeah. Probably about the best benefit that we did was there's a quarter of CRP that's about 5 or 6 miles. I'm sick to know where it is. Southeast of here that we bombshelled one August. It was about August 20th, and it had just a whole horde of Siberian elms across it. And I went back to that field multiple years after that. And I'd just drive out through there and reach out my pickup window and be snapping twigs on trees to see if that thing was truly dead. And I think they are. There were some 12-footers out there we killed with that fire, which was fairly impressive because usually stuff like that, if it looks dead, it's probably just top killed and it'll sucker back out, but they're dead, like dead.
So I think some of the takeaways from what Dusty just said there was you do have to do a little bit of planning ahead of a growing season burn. And so whether if it's in a grazing scenario, you've got to have that standing old material in there to carry that fire. And in the eastern part of the state, if you do a spring burn, it ain't happening. Even with the kind of volume that you might grow, you're not going to have a growing season burn anytime that year. It's going to be the following year. So you got to plan a little bit ahead. The other thing that I would say is that with the restrictions, I think the nesting period is still restricted. So you can't do a growing season burn until after July 15th. That's a policy within the CRP program. The other thing, Lisa?
Well, I'm just going to say, a lot of times when we see Sericea coming in, it's in a patch.
Yeah.
So you spray, it's probably going to be a spot spray, right?
Could be. I mean, if you got it at that level, then yes, absolutely. And I'll give you my thoughts on that too here in just a moment. But whatever that patch size is, don't be a splurger. Spray outside of that area, because what you don't see is there's probably a lot of smaller plants on the outside edge of that.
Yeah. I'll tell you that a lot of those that I was looking at over the last couple of weeks, so whenever I roll into something like that, I'm not chemicals have their place. They do. And they're not the silver bullet answer, but they have their place. But I'm not a huge proponent, because of the collateral damage issues. I'm not a huge proponent of this hose everything every year sort of thing. Frankly, that's typically a waste of money, and it's ecologically damaging. So when I roll into a place thinking, okay, how are we going to deal with this? Because I know there's Sericea there, because I see a little patch here. I immediately start at the bottom in my thought process, like, okay, spot spray, and I'm going, spot spray. And then sometimes the thought of spot spraying that, I'm thinking, I try to put myself in your shoes, like if I was out there doing it, could I do this? And then if it starts to diminish off, and I get clear, halfway across the field, and I get out and stand up and look around on my pickup rain board or four-wheeler, like, no, there's no way. This has got to be
too far.
Broad. It's just too far gone. There's just too much of it spread all across the field. Then, yeah, I think a lot of cases we have to go to broadcast spray. And so, out of the 14 or 15 out of 20-some fields that I looked at that had Sericea, about half of those were going to have to be broadcast sprayed. And the other half, I think, probably could be spot sprayed.
Yeah. I think the one thing, have you ever driven by someplace and you go, I wonder what happened there? I find myself doing that because I spend a lot of time by myself and I'm the only one talking to me in the car. But as you said that, because I was dealing with a ranch down in southern part of the Flint Hills who is a cow-calf operation. Fall calves in the Flint Hills doesn't make sense. Year-round grazing doesn't make sense. I mean, this is the way that my career had taught me to think. Only burnt once every 6 years, doesn't make sense. But when he said, because it's owned by a foundation, and he said, well, I'm going to spray this pasture this year. And I then asked the question, because I was doing a review for this foundation. I said, when was the last time it was sprayed? He said, oh gosh, 25 years ago. And I thought, that doesn't make sense. Because everything around it had probably been sprayed multiple times in 25 years. Grazed year-round, burnt once every 6 years, and had plenty of acres per animal, so he had cover. Didn't have Sericea like everybody else around, and didn't have brush like everybody else around. And again, this was like a 1950s model management system. And so I had to back up and explain this to a community foundation who weren't farmers or ranchers and try to make sense of that. And so it's getting me to this question for Dusty, and I hadn't thought about it because I was a part of some of these discussions 15 years ago, was that I said, so I thought about it, why doesn't it have Sericea when everything around it does? I mean, he had Sericea, but it wasn't bad. And the only thing that I could come up with is that cover-wise, only burning once every 6 years, but having mulch over that surface that did not allow that seed to germinate. I would be interested to know that on this CRP that you said that now has it, whether those were hayed during a drought.
Be interesting to know.
And that cover removed, soil exposed, seed germinate, and now we've got Sericea. But that was all done because, a political point of view of needing hay, and I'm not saying you didn't need hay, because you're in a drought situation, you make those decisions. But a lot of times we don't know what we don't know. But my guess would be that it could be related to a haying operation in the late summer, not much regrowth, exposed soil, seed that was there, and now it's growing. That's one of those I wonder moments that I have.
It could be that. It could be, it's not just Reno County. I've seen the same pattern in northern Kingman, all of Stafford, fair chunk of Pratt, out into Kiowa, some in Edwards County. Mm-hmm. So all those counties are under the big bend of the Ark River. Yeah. We all share what we call in the agency we call it a major land resource area. It's an area of collectively somewhat similar soils. Although I will tell you that if you want to find the greatest hodgepodge of soils in this state, this county is a mixing pot. I mean, you just don't ever know what you're going to get. But having said that, a lot of the CRP, particularly right around where we're sitting right here, is on shallow barger soils, sandy loam soils, and some of those CRP stands. I mean, the grasses are CRP in absence of grazing tends to have bunch-bound grasses and large plant interspaces. Yep. Doesn't look like it until you get down there and push the leaves back and like, well, there's an area the size of that table with nothing growing on it.
Looks pretty good
No
from the
rooted
road.
plant.
Looks good from the road.
And, you know, I think those kind of opportunities lend themselves to seed germination as well. But.
Yeah. Anyway, so we better, I know some of you guys probably have to pick up your kids from school here in a little bit, so I better hurry. Never miss an opportunity. If you see that plant, that's what I was talking about. If you got a pocket knife and you see a plant, a lot of times I'll bail out and I'll dig that sucker up and make sure it's dead. If I've got a spade in the back of my four-wheeler or on my side-by-side, I'll do whatever it takes. I just have got this internal gut feeling that I'm gonna take revenge on it as much as I can. Be prepared to be surprised, and I'll explain that. You'll think you've done the greatest thing and it looks really good and come out next year and be really disappointed that you missed a lot of plants. And I'll say that happens even within a year. My brother-in-law is retired as well, and I don't know how many times, it's in CRP, that he has driven at every 2 weeks, and he sprays more every 2 weeks that he did not see or that he missed the previous 2 weeks. So the scouting and the repeated go back, just because you did one thing this year and you thought that's all I'm really obligated to do, you're not going to win the war against this plant by doing it one time. You got to be out there repeatedly. And this comes back to what I do. Yes.
So you said your brother sprays it all the time.
With spot spray.
Is he not fighting himself, hitting that new growth all the time and taking away vegetative cover? New growth isn't like.
He's killing plants, so mature plants, but it's amazing in CRP or anything that's got any growth to it at all. You can miss one 5 foot away from you that you just never saw. And so he goes one direction, he turns around and goes the other direction, and when you kill that plant and 2 weeks later you come back, you can see that brown one. Then the next one you see, how'd I miss that one?
Yeah.
And so I've in a spot spray situation where you're dictating how it's going to be controlled, you can't do it often enough. And maybe you switch chemicals from Remedy to Escort in the fall, and I'm going to be honest with you, I don't have stock in either one that I know of, but I've started mixing them. I've got some in my tank at all time, and I may switch a little bit, but I've dumped 2,4-D in it, I've got Escort, and I've got Remedy in there all at the same time, and if I see it, I spray it. Now, I will say, and Dusty brought this up, that when it starts to flower, this is a little bit of a point that you need to know about the plant. From the onset of those flowers, 6 weeks, it'll make viable seed. So you need to know that. I saw some, and it was an equip contract, and we were paying for it. I say we all were. They were spraying it end of October. That plant is done.
Probably looks.
It
more
looked
similar
probably
to
a lot
this.
like that. It might have had a little bit of a green cast to it, but we weren't doing anything than just wasting money. So,
You talk about missing them. So I stopped and plucked this one here just about 3 hours ago, 3 miles down the road from my house because I knew there was a patch of it. Actually, I stopped to pick the old World Bluestem that's still in this bag here because there's a whole bunch of that there. I knew that there to be a Sericea problem on that field. The gentleman that's been spraying it is not here today, so I guess I'll talk about him. This guy he is aware of the problem. He's on top of it, works himself into a fever about spraying it. I walked out there right off the corner of the field, just pulled off and walked out in there, I don't know, 50 feet maybe. And there was just tracks all over in this corner because the corner is also where we knew the Sericea was the worst. UTV tracks just all over the place, and you could tell, he had been there. He had sprayed with Escort in the fall, I presume.
Yeah.
That's why this grass was all mashed down there. And then here, standing just nice and proud, was this plant that he missed. And as you can see, it's...
had seed on it.
Oh, yeah. That's why we had it in the bag, because I definitely don't want to take that back to my place, but yeah. So, you can't even see them. Think of like a seed tick that you find attached to your shin, down in your socks in the early part of the year. That's about how big those seeds are. So,
Yep. They'll get in. And the reason I said this August 1st, scout particularly close, I'm a contract grazer, so I take in cows, fall bred dry cows every year, and I graze them for 4 months for an individual, and they leave about any time from 15th of August till 1st of September. And I'm spraying Sericea all through the summer. And I think, man, I've done a pretty good job. And so the cows left about mid-September, 1st of October, I drive back out there. There is Sericea everywhere. Those cows had grazed that down and kept it grazed down. Once the pressure was removed, all of a sudden I got about 10 inches of growth in the month of September. And there it was. And so you might, again, you can't scout too much, but be prepared to miss some because cattle have grazed it down to where you don't see it. And when I was talking about what Lisa said about that area, if you find that area, I guarantee you need to probably increase that spray twice that size because there are going to be small plants on the outside that you miss. And you'll be frustrated when you come back and think, I sprayed that last year and wasted, maybe I spray an iced tea, I don't know, but I didn't get it done. Okay, so this was the slide I was talking about, Dusty, and question that goes back to Cammie. Some opportunities, Dusty has done some, I looked at a few last year, but there are some opportunities that, coincide with some government assistance, whether that be by state or local or even federal. So I don't know whether you want to dive into that just a little bit.
Yeah, the primary opportunity there, USDA-wise, program-wise, is would be through EQIP on grazing land. So so that's on native range or CRP that has been or is being rolled in or rolled back to grazed range, I should say. Now, if it's active contract CRP, you need to understand, and I'm not FSA. We run the technical legwork for that program as an agency. FSA is the agency that administers that program. But I guess we're all one now. We're all one big happy family now.
We're all happy.
Yeah, it's good. You need to understand that when you sign a CRP contract, you agree to keep all the invasive junk out of there. Okay, you are contractually obligated to that. So there's no extra assistance or incentives or anything like that to do it. That annual rental rate that you get, the annual payment for CRP, that's not just, it's not a land retirement program, and I think that's an unfortunate. That's kind of the thought process that's become of CRP, and that's why it has so many problems. But that rental rate, and it's dwindled off in recent years, but it's a lot of that ground you'd be hard pressed to probably get that anywhere else. That's why it's in CRP, right? It's a financial decision. But along with that financial decision and payment comes some responsibility, not only for Sericea, but Sericea, Old World Bluestem, any kind of woody encroachment. You're responsible to keep that stuff off the CRP. And so just like any good plant problem, bad plant problem, it behooves you to get on it as soon as you can. So early detection's key. So not just getting your check every October, but monitoring the range and looking for this stuff, because just because you don't have it and it wasn't seed contaminant on your place, maybe your neighbor did, and now you have it. So this stuff's constantly ebbing and flowing across the landscape. So you gotta get out there and take a look and stay on top of things. And I know that because of that, there's a number of upset people that did not get accepted back into CRP because they had invasive stuff on the CRP, and that's in the contract. It's a line item in the contract that has your signature on the bottom of it. So that's all I'll say about CRP program, but do understand that you're obligated to take care of that stuff. So.
Yeah, it's a bit of a challenge. I think I was telling Lisa that years ago when I followed Lyle as a DC in Anthony, and during, thousands of acres of CRP in Harper County, but just as an example of what could happen with Sericea. Sericea hasn't been a noxious weed all that long in comparison to a lot of plants. But in the case of CRP down there, musk thistle had gotten into some of the seed, and I think they narrowed it down. They started finding it in CRP, and they narrowed it down that it was only like 2 seeds per bag. But that was enough to send red flags up. And I think it didn't happen just only in Harper County, kind of through this area. But back then, Sericea wouldn't even been listed as a noxious weed. That seed could have been in there as contaminant, and by the state law, seed law, it wouldn't have mattered.
It would have shown up in that small percentage of
Yeah.
inert material
Inert material.
in your bag tag.
Yeah, it doesn't make you feel much better, but that's just the reality, of what time does. So, seemed like there was something else. But now we got to get to what Lyle came for today, not just lunch, but Old World Bluestem. Dusty's got some examples of it here. And maybe there's a better day, certainly a warmer day, or maybe later in the spring. Identifying this plant, I've had more questions about this and some other herbaceous plants like Old World Bluestem in the last year, I think, than I've ever had before. People are starting to understand it, identify it, notice that it's not right or that it's not something that is desirable. But to me, this one right here is going to make. You used to think that hedge trees were hard to control. Hedge trees are pretty easy to kill in comparison to Sericea Lespedeza. I think this one's going to make Sericea Lespedeza look pretty easy when it's all said and done. And the ramifications of this plant occupying native rangeland and the end result, I don't see as anything positive. Just because of some of the things that happens, and I'll kind of briefly go over some of those. Native to Asia and Europe, extremely competitive. We used to say that if you had good native grass around it, you're not going to have this problem in yours. Not true. Not true. Extremely competitive, very prolific cedar. That doesn't have any seed on it, but it's got a really light, fluffy seed on it. It can stick in your clothes. It can stick in your grill of your side-by-side, your four-wheeler, your truck, on your mower. Any equipment that may be mowing road ditches, you'll transport this stuff. This is a pasture actually in North Lyon County, and they did not seed this. I mean, it's 200 and some acres, and it has you don't find native grass, period, in that pasture, and that's just been in the last 20 years. Completely taking it over, and it looks like the best thing since pecan pie. But when you start walking out in that and feel the roughness of it and the erosion that happens in between those individual plants, there's a lot of erosion that is happening in there as well. And so it's a scary thing. And part of why that happens is that it puts off this root exudate that outcompetes or it kills the other plants around it. And so it's extremely, extremely competitive. Again, erosion, cattle will eat it, especially after it's burned. Oklahoma can tell you that. Oklahoma has a whole lot more acres of Old World Bluestem than what we do. Fortunately, when CRP came in the 80s, we fought against that. We had one individual that doesn't live too far from here that just said, no, it ain't happening in Kansas. But we did have some CRP in Kansas that was carried in Oklahoma that planted Old World Bluestem in Kansas. But anyway, it's here now. Here's the thing that scares me the most, and this came from some work that Keith Harmony did. An area, and a lot of times you'll see these little circles. They might be like 10-foot circles. Those things can double 3 times in 10 years. Yep. 3 times in 10 years. And that's in haze. So when you add the change in weather as you go east, expect that expansion to happen more rapidly. Extremely scary plant. Right now, one primary treatment option, NRCS has tried a few different things with just going in with something like a non-selective contact herbicide like glyphosate, and you just nuke everything. You take it all out. Not the choice, but there is one, a Mazapir or trade name Arsenal, that at certain rates you can go in there where you've got it in native grass as well, and it'll take out that plant or at least diminish it and still not hurt the native plants. Now you're going to suffer some forb and legume loss probably within that as well. It gets back to what Dusty said. You got collateral damage with that. I can't emphasize this enough. You got to get it when it's small, because once it takes over large areas, I'm afraid the battle's lost. Yes.
Yes.
That's a perfect question. Yeah, if you see it in small and you're not worried about, native grasses will fill in an area, something like that in a heartbeat. So no big issue there. When it gets the size of this room, then you're talking about something different. But glyphosate is a good option at that point.
Will one application of glyphosate in the growing season when it's take care of it?
I think the target is certainly after a fire and probably in the month of June. When you've got that canopy off of it and you've got it growing right there, you can be pretty specific about your target then. But will one treatment? I would say scout, scout, scout. Because where we tried that in some equip back in late 90s, early 2000s with glyphosate on an area, you could go in there and you could spray that, and it was burn, post-burn, so with a broadcast application, and you would still have some that survived. And whether that's a shadow, whether it was on the outside, you still missed some. So I think you got to follow back up with that. Were you going to say something, Dusty?
Yeah, I mean, there's some, and well, they're still working on this, I'll say that, but there's some of this, a lot of these trials where they've done 2 applications in 1 year. One right at about the 4th leaf stage, pretty early, and then the other one right before flowering, which is going to happen first part of July, and that was fairly effective. And they did that with both glyphosate and imazapyr arsenal. So, a lot of what I see in this area is I find it as single plants. That's certainly how it starts, obviously, but it's very, very common to see. I call them mottes, and there'll be a clump of it, maybe, the size. If the area of one of these 2 tables put together was square or round, about like that, about the size of a full-size pickup, round out there, and you'll see those. And right now they're really easy to pick out because they're white.
Yeah, they look different.
And there's a picture in this thing here. So the back side of the first page in the lower left there, that picture, that is not a mott. That's a sea of old World Bluestem out there. But you can see right in the foreground of the picture at the bottom of the photo. That's native grass. That's the good stuff. And then you can kind of see that line out there, and from there on out, that's all old World Bluestem. It's pretty distinctive this time of year. But I've watched these. In fact, the field that I plucked this out of, it's one of those goofy deals. There's a quarter section there, and the thing, I mean, it all looks like it should just be one thing, but there was 2 different CRP contracts on there, and Anyway, one of them is expired, and the other one's not yet. And this came off of the still active CRP contract. And over the past, 4 years, I've watched that thing expand, and we're just about to get to the point where the motts are starting to meet up. And then once that happens, then you've got a serious mess. Number one, you're kind of really on the fence between what do you do with it, chemical treatment wise. You just call it quits, start over. What do you do? Number 2, once you have to think about this. Once you spray out a mott, since you're using a fairly even imazapyr is a fairly non-selective herbicide.
Right.
So it's when we say it doesn't hurt grasses, I mean it dings them and it can kill them. It's just not quite as rough on them as glyphosate. All right, but you're going to have this area that's void of any vegetation, and then the first thing back in there is going to be some weedy annual stuff, and probably some ragweed and horseweed, or mare's tail as a lot of people call it, that sort of thing. But if you eliminate the grass, the native grass that's in between those motts, then you have a perimeter to area ratio problem of how the native grass is going to naturally revegetate the zone that you've just nuked out. So catching it early is key, and we'll see where this one goes. We're going to maybe get on it. We're going to roll it all into grazed range when the other CRP contract comes out, but we're going to go ahead and start nuking the old world under CRP contracts, so we're not quite so far behind the 8 ball when we're ready to graze it.
And I didn't say that there's actually 2 of them. There's probably more, but these are the 2 primaries in Kansas, Caucasian and yellow, and there's no difference between as far as what's good or bad. Kill them both, kill them all.
There's some those pretty much are the 2 species. There's cultivars.
Yeah.
Off of that, you'll hear King Ranch Bluestem,
WW Spar.
WW Spar, Turkestan Bluestem. There's several others. Iron Master.
I think the big thing, and I had a guy there, I live near the town of Gridley, and he had an old cropland field, and he wanted to seed it back to grass, didn't get into CRP, so he thought, I'm going to go buy. I blame a lot of my problems on Missouri. I don't know where you guys go for your problem, but anyway, he was able to buy, he wanted some cheap bluestem grass, and so one of the seed companies in Missouri, this was a whole lot cheaper than big bluestem, Indian grass, side oats grass, any kind of a mix like that. So he bought some and seeded it. And wow, yeah. And the problem is it's fairly steep and it's eroded something severely today. But anyway, it's get it when it's small. The problem, and Keith Harmony has had some pretty good results on treatments over a 3-year period and then going back in and reseeding that. And that may be an option for you. But I guarantee you in a lot of rangeland with a lot of rock, that's not an option. And so once it's there, I really worry about the history of some of those grasslands. Become familiar with identifying it. You know, I think sometimes people might confuse it with silver bluestem and maybe even side oats grama. They both kind of have,
Especially in the dormant
dormant season, they all have kind of a little bit of a white color to them. There's some silver right there.
So this plant is also a Bothriacloa genus species. However, this plant here, silver bluestem, is actually native to North America. I wouldn't say that it's a great plant. It's actually, when you find a bunch of this, it's an indication that you've got ground disturbance, and you know, if you find it in native range, it'll be up on a nice rounded hilltop that's been hammered pretty hard by cattle. So it's, in old terms, it would have been what range people would have called an increaser. It increases under heavier grazing pressure, right? But this plant, you get, it still does have the seed head on it. It's just that little cotton swab looking fluff ball on top of it. And one distinctive thing about this plant is that the stem is very zigzaggy on it.
Every node kind of changes directions a little bit.
There's one that really shows it there. Whereas this plant here, number one, look at the robustness of that stem. And this plant here is a lot finer stem. And an old world will grow, you'll find it, and if you actually dig down the middle, it'll only be rooted out of a clump about that big. And then when it comes out of that clump, it does this. Just a nice gentle arc up and out, or out and up, I should say. Whereas, silver bluestem is just single stems just kind of sticking up. So.
Yeah. But I think sometimes we confuse them, but you got to get familiar with them, especially. In my country, where I told you I've got some, and it's because I had a yearling grazer and it's upslope. This thing is really gravity oriented too. If you got it above you, be prepared, it's coming your way. Whether that by wind or water, it's going to move down on you. I've got some on my perimeter, and so we scout the perimeters along that fence line, cut it off before it gets there, if at all possible, and do your neighbor a friendly, thing too, and spray a little bit over on his side. If you're that kind of person. I know the guy, so I will. And again, this gets back to, I'm pretty positive about this, but this one scares me a lot. I really still feel like I can win the battle against Sericea. It's not that it's going to be a short battle. I'm not sure when we get to this one. I mean, there's some stuff out there now where we do some growing season and more fall-oriented type of fire, and maybe seeing some positive results of that, but it's a challenge. And it's not going to be anything short of just a lot of hard work going forward.
And I think it's still a conjunction deal. So the field that came off of, it was pre-COVID, so it was probably the summer of 18 or the summer of 19. We burned it, and I went back and monitored it for a while. So, and this is particularly true even in grazed range, because if you have big bluestem, little bluestem, all the good stuff out there, but you have mott's of this, the cattle will graze around this stuff. I mean, this stuff is junk compared to our native grass for palatability and nutrition wise. Now, if you have a whole field of it, you can you can make them eat it. That's what they do in Oklahoma and Texas, right? But either case, that stuff grows, nothing eats it unless you force them to. And so it's constantly building up thatch, right? And so what we did was we kind of kept track in the field when we burned that day. So we had a head fire area, but we let it backfire a long ways in the summer. And I went back and where we had backfired, I'm not saying there's not still Old World Bluestem there, but it hit it hard. You know, a lot of heat, real low to the ground, because when it burned into those motts of Old World and gotten all that thatch, it got those plant crowns really, really hot.
Yeah, and one thing that I've noticed on CRP a lot of times, and I don't know, it's just a little bit different in the ash, but you can almost pick those spots out. After it's almost like a white ash laying there.
Yep.
Then I'd go back out there and I'd flag them things and be ready to come back and fight when they start to grow again. But it does look different. In our part of the country over there where they do burn a lot more annually, at least 2 out of 3 years, cattle will graze it early. But once it gets mature, like Dusty said, they're going to avoid it. It goes into that analogy, just because it's green doesn't mean it's good.
One thing we saw, and I don't have any explanation for this. This has been about 2 years ago. I was looking at a ranch down in Comanche County, and it was a sizable spread. It was 6,000-7,000 acres. And the ranch manager was there. We were out, and it was actually an area, I don't know that it had been CRP. It might have been an old Great Plains seeding from the 70s, but this thing had once been farmed, seeded back to native grass, but it had an infestation of Old World Bluestem on it. And we were motoring around out there on our ATVs looking at stuff, and myself and the guy from the local office, we kept on finding these areas, and they just grazed to the ground. But the native grass was, it was appropriate use at the end of the growing season stuff. You know, we were out there in, I don't know, late November, early December, and finally got to digging, like, what is it that they graze to the ground? And finally figured it's Old World Bluestem. And so we caught up with that guy out on the road a little bit later, like, what in the world? When were they in there? And like, well, that was the last field they hit. He said, I noticed that too. He said, I've never seen that, but they hit it. He said about 2 days after the first hard killing frost, they just moved in, and I mean, it didn't hurt the plant because it was dormant. And I'm sure the cattle didn't get any benefit from it. It's an animal behavior thing, I don't know what, but they went in, they selectively picked those moths and just took them down. Weird.
It's hard to explain some things. You know, I think sometimes that when you get a frost, between brome and fescue in our country, a killing frost on brome will turn cows off of it and they'll go right to fescue. And it could be something that, just in, a lot of times some plants will hold protein levels further into the year. And native grass, typically by the time you get to that time of the year, 3 to 5% crude protein, it might have been enough that they found a difference, and who knows. But that's the whole animal behavior side that I think is really interesting. So this last slide maybe is what you feel like after you've listened to us for a couple hours, but we'd be glad to answer any questions that you might have.
Before we go to questions, identification of both of these is key. I think people struggle with the Old World Bluestem because it is a warm season perennial grass, and all of our good stuff is warm season perennial grass, okay? So it can be somewhat hard to tell. Like I said, it's pretty easy to pick out there right now if you have your eye calibrated for it. It's these white moth patches, but you need to be aware, there are other things than the dormant season, silver bluestem and the single seedless stem of Cytosgrama that stick up this time of year that can resemble that. In the growing season, this stuff is bright lime green. It is. And once you get an eye for that, I can drive down the road at 70 miles an hour like, And the same way with Sericea. So like right now is the worst time to be trying to find it because it looks like this. And it's hard to find right now. It's out brown and red just like everything else is out there. But in the growing season, when you get an eye for it, you can find that too. And I think Howard and Lisa were planning some roadside talks. I think we were thinking about, and I'll let Howard speak that later, but I guess just a forerunner, maybe May, and then again in August, thinking about Sericea to get everybody, okay, this is what you're looking for. That way you can go find it and spray Sericea in June, and then this is what you're looking for, and go find it and spray it 1st September when it flowers. I think maybe in the May one, we can probably find one of these real nice CRP fields that has both problems, which there's plenty of them around. And probably look for some Old World. If we do it late enough in May, we can probably pick up some Old World Bluestem in the grass green color, because people struggle hard with this plant. The Sericea, there's some other things out there. There's some other stuff that we put out there on purpose that we want out there. There are other Lespedezas, right? Not all. There's a whole horde of Lespedezas, and most of them are not bad. Pretty much just this one. That one little handout I gave you we'll kind of help you out on that. And I'll be honest, I mean, the growth form, once you get to looking at it, I mean, you can tell this. The growth form wise and leaflet wise, probably the closest one that resembles it is slender.
Yeah.
Slender Lespedeza, but once you get used to looking at the growth form, you can pick it out. But you can almost always pick the leaflet. You know, you're talking leaflets that are ½ inch long, and they'll be in 3s and 5s and 7s, in this case 3s. And pick them and hold them up to the sunlight so the sun shines through the green leaflet, which is what those pictures are, and look at the veination and the shape of the leaflet. So Sericea leaflet is kind of
Club
like
shape.
a Fred Flintstone club shape, you know, narrow, and then just at the top, whereas the other ones narrow, wide, and then they narrow back up at the top, okay? But the veination is the big key for me. So it just got those real parallel veins that go out to the margin of the leaflet, whereas a lot of those other ones look like the kind of a meshy net veination in the leaflet.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Is there cost share on World Bluestem, not in CRP?
yes, in grazed range, yes there is. Yep, all those are going to be herbaceous invasive weed control. Yep.
What amounts?
I don't have that. I don't do contract administration. No, we can get that for you, Candy.
Yeah, I don't know, you know, with that, we're kind of, it's still a little bit what I would say new in the ballgame in comparison to Sericea, and our recommendations on Sericea have changed quite a bit in 20, 30 years, so I would suspect that it may do the same with Old World Bluestem, but get it early is the big thing. Seemed like there was something I was going to say, but I can't remember now. So, any other questions? Yes.
Would Farm Service let us go in and mow it and then go through and spray it? Because I was trying to spray some, it was so tall, my little sprayer is just spot spraying.
In CRP?
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and Sericea? Or?
Well, it was Lespedeza some kind.
Okay.
Another was anything.
Well, first thing, would be to find out if it is Sericea. But yeah, one of the things that, you know, I think there are some things that you know, just would make sense and things that just don't make sense at all. But, you know, restrictions, I guess, I think they're pretty open to that kind of discussion today. One of the things that what you would do and see, the reason, not only because you couldn't see it, but a lot of times when we were first fighting this, one of the reasons why we would go in and mow like the 1st of August would be because your grass has really changed from a vegetative to a reproductive phase at that point in time. That Sericea would grow back up and you could get more coverage with chemical down into that plant community. When the grass was really tall, a lot of times you just couldn't get chemical down to those Sericea plants. So the answer to that should be yes, but I would say check locally. Yeah. Never trust Dusty or I. Check locally, because one of the lessons that I learned years ago in Clay Center, Kansas, when I first started, somebody came in and asked me a question about CRP, and I answered, and when I walked out, the secretary said, "That person's from Cloud County." And then I had to call Cloud County and say, "This is what I said." But not everybody tells you the same story, so go local and find out what you are able to do.
So this other stuff, these other Lespedezas
Are all good.
They don't grow like
Nope.
crazy?
No,
No.
they're beneficial.
No, in fact, the more if
Not
they
in big patches?
no, typically not.
I was doing Sericea.
I'm sure. Probably is.
Yeah, typically not.
Nope.
I was wondering, when you say you first started treating it, how long ago was that?
It's interesting, especially with Sericea, and it's a whole nother story, but with Sericea, probably in the 70s is when we really recognized it as a problem. And it's been here since the 30s, you know, largely in Kansas. So how did it go from here to there and not really become a problem until that point in time? And I don't know how to answer that question. It's, again, another one of those things. I wonder. There was some interesting in Prairie State, which is not an ag school, but they have a teacher there that has done quite a bit of work on Sericea Lespedeza. They're the ones that came up with the fire side of it, that you got to get it above 185 degrees for more than 2 minutes to kill the seed. A lot of times our head fires just don't do that. They don't have the duration. That's where we learned some of that. But one of the things that they found too was that a lot of the bacteria that we use with soybeans, so we go in and inoculate fields for soybeans so that they could grow, a lot of those legumes have specific bacteria that they like. Sericea likes them all. And what's interesting is they found that some of that same inoculant that might have been on cropland in the United States, put it on cropland, they find it even on other continents, that it's moved, through water, it's gone through river systems in the ocean and found it in other places. And so to me, it's very competitive. It's not only a competitive plant, but it uses a lot of different bacteria. But when did soybeans become big in the United States? Kind of in that same time frame, in the 70s. And so how did it, I don't know. I mean, I just think about those kind of things every once in a while. It gets me in trouble. But that's when we started to see a lot of Sericea explosion.
Well, I have trouble with it too. And I think that, I thank you, look, I know I've made a call to a range specialist, and he told me that the problem with Sericea Lespedeza is that there's not been enough education for the farmer. And I would certainly agree. And I appreciate the workshop today. And I'm sorry that we didn't have it 10 years ago.
Oh, this is great.
I think this is pretty good.
Yeah.
And the roadside deals, those are highly beneficial. We've done, I don't know, Howard and I were talking this morning, we've done 3 or 4 of those, probably scattered over the last 6 or 7 years. Well, about when we first started noticing, like, driving down the road, like, where is all this Sericea coming from? And then I got to ask them some questions, and I found out that, well, back in the early 90s, there was a handful of producers that choked some money out of a seed company for a few treatments because they reckon, like, yeah, well, maybe we caused that problem, but it's probably a little too late for finger pointing at this point. Now we just have a problem. But yeah,
the one thing it gives me hope, and I shouldn't even probably say this, but because I think with Old World Bluestem, we don't want to get to this point. But when I was younger, my kids were little, we did a lot of canoeing in the Ozarks in Arkansas, and that's when I really became familiar with Sericea. And I just thought, wow, man, do they have a problem. And now I realize that we do. But today, if I go back into some of those areas, it is not as bad today as it was back then. And that does not make any sense to me. Although there are some people that would think from an ecology standpoint that some invasives have a course. And then things tend to moderate out. With Sericea, maybe, I don't know, I don't think we want to get to that point, but they don't treat stuff like that in Missouri. I mean, you can drive to Kansas City in the spring and see musk thistle that looks like the state flower. So they're not spraying the Sericea, but why is it less today than maybe what it would have been 30 years ago? I don't know. With Old World Bluestem, I don't want to take that risk. I think the damage to the surface of the soil would be so great by that point in time that we would have lost. So another one of those I wonder things.
yeah.
Anything else? Whew, good deal.
Right.
Thank you, gentlemen.